Foster Care Nation, listen up.
Today is May 31st, 2022. If you listen to this when it first comes out, today is the last day of Foster Care Awareness Month. And so, guys, we just wanted to put one last big little guilt trip on you and say, man, there's kids out there waiting who need some help. If you're not the person to do it, share an episode, share this around with some people, and help bring more people into the solution of this problem that we have in our society with all these kids who need a place to stay, who need a family, who need people who believe in them to step up. That's just all we can ask of you, really, is just to share an episode. Now, if you'd like to support us a little bit further, monetarily, we would love it. That'd be awesome. There's no need to, but if you want to, you could always come over to patreon.com/fostercarenation or buymeacoffee.com/fostercare. If you would like to support us in that way, that would be awesome. But really, what we would prefer more than anything is just share these episodes and help bring more people into the fold of working to help kids from hard places. Thanks a lot.
You can forget a lot of things, Foster Care Nation, but never forget this. You're listening to Unparalleled Studios.
I see no.
Foster Care Nation, listen up. This is
Foster Care and Unparalleled Journey.
strength for the powerless, courage for the fearful, hope and healing for wounded hearts.
Hello and welcome back to Foster Care and Unparalleled Journey with Jason. And again, no Amanda. Sorry guys, we had to leave her out. There's a couple little ones running around the house today that she has to keep an eye on. We can normally keep the little ones rounded up, but today they are, 1 and 2 basically. So that's not going to work to let them manage their own selves. So today you just got me again. And since I am not the guy you probably want to listen to talk all the time, trust me, my kids, my wife, they tell me I do too much of it. They don't want to hear it all. So I brought in a guest and author and a lady with an incredible story, Kim Peacock. How are you doing today, Kim?
I'm doing well. Thank you so much for having me.
Hey, I'm glad to have found you. I don't even remember how we got connected, if it was a PR person somewhere. Somehow or another, we got connected, and I went and listened to your story on a couple places, and my gosh, do you have a story. I mean, like, quite the story, and I wanted to talk to you about it just because there's some success, there's some hard stuff, and these are the stories that really define what we do in our lives. So how did you get involved in foster care in the first place?
Well, our first experience with adoption was we adopted our son, Alex, from Russia. And that was way back in 1997. And we had a blended family anyway. So that story in itself was very defining for us. It went way outside of our comfort zones. But unfortunately, a year after we adopted our son, our daughter, Nicole, passed away in an accident. So we went from trying to get used to having this little Russian guy running around and helping him adapt to grieving our daughter. So at that point, I thought I would never want to open up my heart again to even the thought of foster care. But we were approached by a family member who had some relatives that were removed from their home and 2 little boys that were removed from their home, and they wanted to know if we were willing to adopt them. So we started we were at the time lived in California. We started with with the foster care process, because that is the beginning of adoption there. And the boys ended up going back to their birth parents. They ended up going back 3 separate times. So I called the social worker and told her we were going to be pulling out of the process, because I just did not want to risk my heart for that. It just felt like, especially so soon after losing our daughter, I thought foster care would be too risky for me. She convinced us to stay, and that's how our adventure in foster care began. And it was quite an adventure.
You know, some of those caseworkers, I think, I think they should be like car salesmen.
Yeah. Yeah, it's true. I was dead set against it because I just thought, oh, this is going to be too hard on our hearts. You know, you're going to have these kids, you're going to get attached, they're going to go back or whatever the situation. Every situation's different, but and I thought there was no way. But she convinced me that it was a need and it would be okay, and she would help me walk through the process, and she did. She was great.
Yeah, well, and I mean, our stories have a little bit of similarity there, having lost a daughter, you know, down to almost the exact same age. And when I've heard your story in the past, I'm not going to say that I left those podcasts with dry eyes and a smiley face, because that you guys went through some stuff, right? I mean,
right.
As a husband and wife, as bio parents, as adoptive parents, you know, foster parents, like all those little pieces and part have its own piece in the story, you know, and to have said goodbye to a daughter, I'm just going to say, I've got a little guy tattooed on my chest right here. All right. That Carl's tattooed over my heart for a reason. Carl stole the heart of everyone in the family. And when Carl went home to some biological placement, he went to a good place. He had a family member that had, and she was an elderly gal, I guess you would say, old enough. She was on a fixed income, and she had some storms came through and ripped the roof off of her house. Welcome to Missouri, where we have tornadoes, and some unscrupulous insurance bait and switch company came in, and they're going to fix her roof, and then they took her money and ran. And so, on a fixed income, she had to figure out how to get her roof fixed, so that this little guy could come stay with her. And so he stayed with us for his first year of life. And I'm just going to say, when he left, like it was horrible. We picked up the family that weekend, went out of town, took a long weekend down in Memphis. We couldn't come home to see all the baby stuff. It was killing us. And it was so hard. And for a long time, I said, that's as close to losing a kid as I ever want to experience. Turns out I was right. I didn't want to ever get that close again. But then, because that's part of the foster system, is that if everything works right, kids are reunified with parents who've decided to change their lives and go out and take care of their kids. And that's amazing when it happens. It doesn't happen as much as it should, but it's amazing. But when it does, we have a kid ripped out of our heart.
Yeah, and that's the goal, yet it's devastating because we try really hard. And I thought in the beginning that I was not supposed to get attached. Like, okay, well, I'm not supposed to get attached. Well, how can you love 100%? How can you love these children the way they need to be loved and do that and be effective? You have to love 100%, but be willing to let go. And that comes with every time one of those little people leave, you do grieve, and it's really grieving over and over and over. It's intentional, because that's what we hope the plan is, that they would go, they would be whole, and they would be able to be reunified with their family, and that it would be a healthy, good situation.
The messed up part of it is that we intend to grieve, right?
Yeah.
Because if you don't grieve the kids leaving, man, did you really have that connection that they needed?
Right. And it's hard. It's hard to dive in deep. And then do that intentionally. But we learned very quickly that it wasn't about us and our comfort in this, because, and it wasn't to fulfill anything in us, because if you do foster care to fulfill something in you, it's going to have really, really bad consequences. That's not the focus. And to be able to help these kids, maybe usher them into a different season of their life. It's hard, but it's in so many ways satisfying, and to know that hopefully you've played a little part in helping them to be as healthy as they can.
Yeah. Well, all that talk about grief in our lives, and it's just something that we bring in willingly, because even though it's hard, it's still needed. It's still good to do if you do it right. But as you look back over that, I don't know exactly how old you and your husband are, but I know that my wife and I, we've been doing it for, I don't know, not quite a decade and a half, 13, 14 years, something like that. And it's had its moments where it tried to take its toll on our marriage, and we had to work really hard through that. So for all the foster parents out there, the foster moms, the foster dads who are going through this, how have you guys managed to keep your sanity and keep a marriage together while you're grieving?
That's been one of the biggest challenges. When we lost our daughter, Nicole, we really had to become intentional about allowing each other to grieve in our own ways, because everybody grieves differently. So that was one big part that introduced us to fighting for our marriage during grief. And then years later, when we started into the foster care system, we both also had to allow that room to have respect for each other, to grieve in those different ways. I grieved the foster kids in a different way when they went back home or went into a different situation than he did. And so because he's a fixer, he thought that he could fix everything and fix these little people at first. And then when we realized that you can't fix another person with loving them, you can just love them and hope that influence permeates them and helps them along their way, but it's not ours to fix them. And so that was one thing I had to allow him to work through that process. But in any kind of grief, it's really important to respect each other's, for the lack of better words, grieving style, because we all grieve differently and each situation is different. For me, one of the early placements we had was a little newborn baby, 5 days old. And he was little, he was a preemie, he was tiny. And so he was in my arms for 3 months solid, trying to work things out with him. And I knew that he was going to probably go back to his mom. And we had such a great story ending with that. But when he left, I physically hurt. And my husband, said, well, you knew the whole time that you're going to let him go. This is what we wanted, right? But he was so good. He just kind of allowed me to be in that hard place. And years later, I had the opportunity to see that mom and that little boy. Of course, he didn't know who I was, but the mom came up and she gave me the biggest hug. And she said, I just want to thank you for being involved in, I'll just call him Jason's life. I just want to thank you because of you, he was in a safe place. And it was really cool to be able to see that on the other side. But that grieving in between there, it was hard.
Yeah. We all hope for those moments of getting to see how it all pans out. And unfortunately, a lot of us don't ever get to see that. We've got a few kids that we watch through maybe some parents' social media stuff, from a distance, because if they don't want a connection, I'm not going to try and force that, but at the same time, it makes my heart feel good when I get to see those smiles show up in pictures. And I see them at the pumpkin patch in the fall or at the zoo in the summer, and they're out living a life of a normal kid. And you go, wow, like we had a hand there, and I can see that coming around to something beautiful.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And that's a blessing. Most of our situations we haven't gotten to see a glimpse into that, but that one gave me just a little bit of hope to go, okay, this is something that is valuable. And every day that I get to love on these kids is a blessing for them and a blessing for me too. It actually expands our hearts. It hurts. And the problem is the more open, the more soft your heart is, the more it hurts when they go. But it's so valuable. And these little people need people just to step in that gap in between the system, whether it's a night or, 3 months, like with the little newborn, or I had one long-term placement. She was over 2 years, and I still am in contact with her today. She calls me mama, and it's a blessing. But there's a lot of those in between stories that I don't know whatever happened.
Yeah, we have mostly those stories where we'll never know what happened. Amanda and I really kind of focus on younger kids, and so there's a good possibility that once they go to a solid family foundation somewhere, whether that's back being reunified with family members, or if it's something entirely different, they end up adopted into a different home. But, a lot of times people just don't want to bring that up to the kid. And so it's our job for our own curiosity to watch from a distance. And, you mentioned something about your husband, just so you know, it's not just your husband. We're all fixers. That's why, most of us have a tool belt somewhere, even though I'm not really sure what's supposed to go in that pouch right there, but I have it, doggone it.
Just in case.
So I look like I know what I'm doing. And I have a construction project coming up. I'm supposed to build a chicken house for my son, and he wants to have a half a dozen chickens. And I'm like, oh dear God, I'm glad there's no code on how these houses get built, because but we had that fixer mentality. He wanted some chickens, and so I'm going to go build a chicken house here coming up soon. And that's that fixer in us. But the truth is, what I've learned is, it's not our job to fix other humans. Our job is really just to create a space where they can begin to heal themselves.
Exactly.
And that's so hard for us guys to accept.
It is because you want to be productive, and you want this to count, and it does count. It just may not look the way that we picture it.
Yeah. Now, if we go back to the beginning, you're talking about the very first little boy that you guys adopted from Russia. I'm curious, what is it that brought you to the place where you decide, we want to adopt a kid? Because that's not everybody's thought process.
No, and it wasn't ours. We had each a daughter from our previous marriages, and then we had one biological daughter. So we had 3 little girls. We thought we were done. We thought everything, this was the way what our family was going to look like. And I went to a church up in Sacramento, and they were talking about Russian adoptions. And I was so moved. And I thought, wow, that's weird. Are we supposed to adopt? And I mentioned it to my husband, and he said, no. Larry said, we are not going to adopt. Maybe we need to give money. Maybe it's money we need to send to Russian orphans or this. And I said, well, just pray about it. So poor guy, every time he turned on the radio for the next year, that's all he heard was Russian adoptions, Russian this, Russian that. And so he did pray about it, and I just kind of let it go. So it was about a year. It may have been a little more than that. And and he said, okay, if I turn on the radio and there's one more story about Russian adoptions, we'll do it. And lo and behold, they're on Focus on the Family, I think it was, had a story about a Russian adoption. So there was a family in our church who also had adopted from Russia. So we just asked them about it, and we started the process. And so it's a really long or it was, now it's not a process at all, but it was a real long process. And so the first little boy that they showed us a video of, we went around, showed our daughters, is this, let's pray about it. What do you all think? And we took a vote, and everybody said yes. And we got our passports, and we went to Russia. And we were there for 10 days and went to court and went through all the process there, which was just the craziest adventure. I had never been out of the country, and it was very, very, it shook me up just to see the process and be outside of my comfort zone. And we brought little Alex home. He was 4 years old at the time and didn't speak any English, put him on an 11-hour flight from Germany. And, but he's an amazing young man. He's grown up. He's going to be 29 this year.
Oh, wow. Wow. Yeah. God has an interesting sense of humor sometimes.
Yeah.
And I will say Dr. Dobson, somebody ought to tell him just how big his influence is, because our story involves me having heard Dr. Dobson say some things on his show. And I grew up in a church that wasn't very spiritually healthy for me as a young kid. And I was listening to him talk one day, and he says if one family out of every third church in America would adopt one kid out of the foster care system, we would empty the system tomorrow. And I thought, see, all you religious people, you think you're so high and mighty, and you're not really. I mean, orphans and widows, right? That's what we're supposed to be taking care of. And
Right.
you guys aren't doing it. You're not doing your job. And the church is not this real thing. And this little voice in the back of my head is like, yeah, what are you doing?
Yeah. Yeah. It's
And,
true.
Yeah. And I'm like, oh, crap.
Yeah. Yeah. It is true. And it's funny how I wish we could have a little chat with Dr. Dobson and just let him know the influence, because even just in our two stories, there is, if one person just does something, and it's not, and I'm sure you would probably feel the same way. It's not because we're great or brave or strong or any of that. We went through that whole process with our knees shaking and knocking and like, what the heck? And we didn't do everything right. It wasn't this smooth little process that it seems like it is on this side. Everything is messy in adoption and in foster care. It's just messy, but that doesn't mean it's bad.
Yeah. Yeah. You mentioned that there was one particular guy, I can't remember his name off the top of my head. If any old guests on here are listening, I can't remember your name. Don't feel bad. I have a hard time remembering my name, my kid's name, and I have one named after me. So yeah, I can't remember the guy's name. I can see his face though, but he talked about, they had adopted their daughter from China, and it was a process that involved some behavior that looked less than legal. It was 20 something years after the process he was talking about it, but he had to get into China with like $20,000 undeclared cash. And so, yeah, it's some of the things that go on in that process are just like mind blowing. Mm-hmm. But, and that's just, it's just part of, we do the things that we feel are right.
Right.
And I think it's important to kind of get a hold of what we think is really truly right. There's so many people, whether they're, religious or spiritual or entirely secular in their belief system, we figure out what's right for us. And then you have to ask yourself, am I willing to do that thing that I believe is right?
Mm-hmm. And it takes just one, you're completely correct. It takes one step. You don't want to look at the big picture because sometimes it's scary, but just taking one step in the right direction and being willing to go outside your comfort zone, because I think it's so easy. And I'm addicted to comfort. I like my little comfortable little world. So thinking about adopting or opening your home in any situation to other people, to people who are hurting, that seems scary and risky. But that's what we're called to do, for sure. Yeah,
it's a calling in my humble opinion. In my mm-hmm. experience, I would not have done this right if it wasn't a calling. Mm-hmm. If it wasn't something that I felt led towards, I would not have done it right. But I am right mm-hmm. there with you. I am a fan of comfort. I have my latte here that I made on my machine here at my house because I love my coffee and I like all my little comfortable things, and this is my desk, and I work really hard to keep the kids away from it because I have my things here and this is comfortable. This is what I like.
Right.
And I don't want to step outside of that.
Right.
Let me tell you something. You bring a little one into your home, they're not going to respect your stuff because mm-hmm. because a lot of times they don't know how to at that age anyways, let alone, all the, whatever their backstory is, what are their trauma, their experience in life, oftentimes did not teach them certain parts of respect for other people's property and things. And, you can have your own biological kids, and I will challenge you if you tell me that your kids knew what that was already either.
Yeah, for sure. For sure.
I'm glad my kids aren't the only ones that have done that to me.
No, they're little people with their own little wills and minds and ideas. So they all are.
I would only disagree because none of mine ever had a little will.
That's a good point. That is a really good point.
Yeah, my kids have always had great big
giant.
Yeah. They want to do what they want to do. As a matter of fact, just yesterday, some of the things kids say to you, right? I had a kid run into the house. My 8-year-old runs into the house. Mommy, Frankie broke the glass. Frankie, what glass? And we can't get him to tell us, so we're both kind of hurrying outside, and we have a lot of kids. So we have a Suburban. We have, big SUVs. So we're all these kids around, and the back door window has been knocked out of the glass, and there is gravel laying around like in a pile, and come to find out, I'm like, what's going on? So I dragged my little guy over, and Frank, and I finally get him to calm down enough to tell me I'm like, what's going on? He said, we were playing, Dad. Me and Turtle, we were just playing. I said, what kind of game were you playing? He says, well, we were throwing rocks at each other, and the first one to get hit 20 times dies.
Oh my word.
Dude, that's not a game. That's like biblical stoning. Like,
this isn't a good game.
Yeah, and the car didn't take 20 times. It only took one, and it lost.
Oh my word.
But yeah, you just like some of the things you come up against in this journey are just mind blowing. That, I mean, let's be honest, little ones don't have a whole lot of neural processing power. We'll say it doesn't sound nice to say, little boys are stupid, but we all were. I don't care what your background is. I don't care, foster, adoption, bio, anything. Every one of us, if we were a little boy, we were probably really stupid at some point.
Yeah.
When I told that story this morning to a group of guys I was leading in the meeting, the one guy messages me, all I can think about is all the Roman candle wars we have, and I don't know how I still have two eyes.
Yeah. How did you guys, that's what I'll say to my husband. How did you survive boyhood? I have no idea. The Lord had a ton of guardian angels around him, and I'm sure all you guys, because it was a hairy upbringing, and I can't believe the decisions that him and his cousins made. It's scary.
I'm glad I'm not the only one, because my God, some of the things we managed to survive. I mean, anybody who can't believe in a little bit of divine intervention just did not live my childhood.
No. And I think it is just a boy thing. It's just one of those wild adventures that you guys have to survive through. And not that little girls don't either, but from my experience, my 3 boys and my husband have given me every gray hair that I have, for sure.
Yeah, I've started naming mine after each gray hair after a different.
Oh yeah, yeah. I agree.
My kids say, "Dad, you're getting old. Your hair's getting gray," and I'm like, "Yeah, it's your fault. Just get over it."
It is. It's totally their fault. You were talking about going outside the comfort zone, and doing things that feel uncomfortable. I was thinking about, and it reminded me of our first placement. And this was after I told the social worker, I'm not going to do this. And she called and said, I just have an emergency placement. These two kids were not picked up from school, and nobody can get a hold of any relatives. You have to go get them. And so it was late at night, and I ended up going to the offices there of the social worker. And these poor little kids, they were worn out. They were in elementary school and just worn out in the clothes they'd been wearing all day. And so, and their siblings, Jose and April, and I ended up bringing them home. And Jose, even though he was young, he was bigger than I was. He's just a big old kid. And so I was a little scared. My husband was out of town. And so I had to figure out, they didn't have any clothes. I didn't have beds set up or anything. And I brought him home, brought him to our house. We fed him. The next day we went and, bought toiletries and clothes for him. But, and I was scared all night. I didn't sleep at all, because I'm thinking, I have these kids I don't even know in my home. And I only had them for a couple of days. But on the way to take them back there, it was just a family mix-up, just a weird situation. So I was going to take them back. The little boy said, hey, from the back seat, I don't remember your name. What's your name, lady? So he'd been with me for 2 days. And I told him, and he said, I will never forget you. And I was that's one of those things that have stuck with me. Even though it's scary, I was scared. I'm sure they were terrified. It's one of those things that we have the opportunity to make a lasting impression. And, that little guy, he may never have thought about me again, but in that moment, it was such a blessing to know that he felt safe. You had said a few minutes ago about creating a space, and that's all it is that willingness to create a space for someone to have healing, to even just have a little bit of respite from their craziness.
I'm always reminded about our very first two kids that we fostered ended up being adopted into our home, and right in the first few months of that, it had been a while since Amanda and I had been out, and my older sister offered to watch the kids one night, and I think it was an anniversary or something like that. And so I'd set everything up. I did like the husband. I got bonus points for this one. I set everything up for the kids to stay with her. I booked the hotel. We got everything set up to have this wonderful night apart. And that evening, we're in the hotel. My wife says, let's call and check on the kids. And so I called my sister, and she said, oh yeah. She said, I hate to tell you this, but I'm thinking, oh dear God, what have they done? Right? Because I know my kids. I know my kids, and my older boys were there too, and they were those boys we're talking about earlier, right? And she says, no. She says, as I was laying them down, Janiyah, who's now our daughter, she said, she looks at me and she says, "Are you my new mommy now?" Oh
my goodness.
We're supposed to be out having a nice romantic, evening out, and it's like, oh crap, that just, that hurts, but it speaks to what she'd experienced.
Exactly.
And so, some of those lessons that I've learned from kids have been some of the most impactful. What's some of the really impactful lessons that the kids have taught you through your experience?
Oh, that's a great question. I think, to let go of my expectations of what any individual will do or be or feel, that every little person has their own God-given spirit, that they, a lot of them are so broken that they don't even, it's so suppressed, but it's in there. And that I need to be able to allow them to be that person, and to, help them usher in the healthy part of that and what that looks like. And I think just letting go of those expectations of what other people should be or do or any of that, because that's not my place. That's good. God created them in a unique way. And my only place is to, hopefully give them boundaries during that process, because when they're in my home, they're going to have boundaries, but also to love them with no expectations. And it was a hard lesson for me, because I always thought I could love people into wholeness, and my picture of what wholeness looked like I didn't take in consideration the journey that every single person who's broken, and in a sense, we're all broken. But every person who's broken needs to go through their own journey.
Oh yeah, yeah. We all think we know what's best,
Yeah.
Yeah. What's the old Van Zant song? I quote this one all the time. If you want to hear God laugh, just tell him your plans.
Yes, exactly. Yeah, it's true. And because we think that we have it all figured out, and the older I get, though, I do realize I know nothing. I cringe at some of my preconceived ideas in my earlier years. So we don't really know anything, and we just need to, walk alongside people the best that we can and love people the best that we can, because that's our directive, is just to love people, love God and love people. So if I just stick to that, he'll take care of my sadness and my grief. It's hard. It sounds very simple. It sounds very easy. It's not easy. But it is simple. It is one of those things that if we just continue to walk through and give our pain to God, let him take care of the results, then, that's the best thing that I can do with my life and my purpose.
The right answer is almost never complicated, and it's almost always hard.
Oh, I like that. Yeah, that's so true. Our daughter, Lisa, who was from my husband's first marriage, when she was little, we're trying to explain to her this rule. And she's like, but that's hard. It was a boundary. And I don't remember what the particular rule was. And she stepped back, and she's this little tiny person. And she goes, Mommy, a good rule is a hard rule. And so we always say that. And that's really true. It may always be, it may be hard, but it's usually simple, uncomplicated. I like that.
Yeah, yeah. It's some of the wisdom of toddlers is really, man,
Yeah.
it makes us realize how dumb we are, how much we've learned and grown, and we're still stupid a lot of times.
Exactly. We still say that if something's hard, is like a good rule is a hard rule.
I like that. That sounds like something I need to teach my kids.
Yeah.
But yeah, so now I know you've got some kids from hard places. What have been some struggles that you've found some ways that you've dealt through those struggles? We've got kids, with diagnoses of dissociation and ADHD and on and on and on. Like our house is full of acronyms. But what have been some ways that you guys have worked through that?
And because every individual is so different, we've just kind of had to treat each one according to their own particular needs. But one of the long-term placements that we had, she just struggled with impulse control. And she later was diagnosed with bipolar, but up and down and that impulse control. And so one of the things that we learned was we just wanted to give her fun and to do all this fun stuff with her. But what we realized is we were constantly overstimulating her with, the big fun thing, the big exciting thing. And so what we learned is we needed to keep it kind of even, because kids that struggle with extremes, if you try to make the big thing, overstimulation can really throw them into, you think this should be fun, like Disneyland should be fun, and they're having a meltdown. So we learned to keep things really simple with her. Our son, Alex, when we adopted him from Russia, it was kind of the same way. They told us to keep things simple. We thought we knew better, and we ended up taking him to the circus while we were in Russia. It wasn't a good experience for him or for us. And we learned very quickly, overstimulation for, kids, their nerves are very raw. And so you have to be really careful to not expect to have this big, exciting thing. So that was one of the struggles, because we wanted to just give them these great experiences, these big experiences, but a lot of times it caused them more trauma than it did. They just needed kind of even things. It doesn't mean you don't have fun, but you just kind of keep it even. So that was one of the things we learned with a lot of the kids that we've had, is just routine is super important. Boundaries are super important for any of the kids that are struggling, because nothing feels safe for them. And boundaries, they feel safe. They help them to feel safe.
Yeah, something that a lot of us are not very good with, that whole boundaries thing. And I think the book's actually on our website called Boundaries, and Dr. Henry Clouden Townsend, I think is who it is. And they have one out there about boundaries with kids. And yeah, it's, if that's not your strong point and you're not a genius with that stuff, I suggest anybody go learn something about it, and why it's there and how you do it and what makes it work out well. But while we're talking about books, you have a book called Victorious Heart, right?
Yes. Victorious Heart is just our journey about the loss of our daughter, Nicole. And it's not just about our story, but it's meant to be a guidebook to help people walk through grief. And grief comes in all different kinds of situations. But for us, that was our first experience with just such a tragic loss. She died in an accident. We saw the accident. We were with her. And so it took everything that we thought we knew about our lives and made us question and put us in a really hard place for a while. And so Victorious Heart is meant to help someone walk through that type of grief as a guidebook.
Yeah. No. I'm trying to remember. There was a story behind the name of that book, wasn't there?
Yeah. Shortly after her funeral, a good friend of mine gave me a bookmark, and it had her name, Nicole, at the top. And underneath it had the meaning of her name, which is Victorious Heart. And that describes Nicole so much. Those two words. She was wild. She was free. She loved people unconditionally, and she definitely had a victorious heart. So when I saw that bookmark, it really became a mantra for me to try to live my life in that way. And then as I was writing the book, I thought that would be the perfect title to describe how I feel like we can still grieve, but but at the same time have a victorious heart. It doesn't seem like those two things can coexist, but they can.
Yeah, it's amazing how many places in nature that two seemingly opposite sort of things kind of coexist in peace, and we didn't even think it was possible.
Exactly. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. You have a website. It's wildvictoriousheart.com, right?
Yes. Yeah. And on my website, there's some more interviews like this one, or different types of things. There's resources on there. I write a blog that I hope will bring encouragement to people struggling through any type of grief, or even just struggles in general. So, and there's ways to contact me on there. So that's a good way to get a hold of me or to find some good resources.
Okay, yeah, we'll make sure that's all down there in the show notes where people can get a hold of you, find your stuff, find your book. And we talked a little before we recorded, and the Audible version is in the works, maybe, hopefully.
It's in the baby stages, but yes, I really needed to, for quite a while, record it. It's going to be a little hard to record, so I'm in the baby stages of getting that, but I'm hoping by this time next year, it will be out and available on Audible.
So April of 23, I can download the book and listen to it, because as most people have heard, I drive for a living. So I listen to books. I do not have time to sit and read. If the kids are in bed, I have time to take a nap. That's what that time is.
Well, and I'm the same way. I very rarely pick up, unless it's a fictional book, I might read before I go to bed, but most of my reading is on Audible or audio. So I'm with you. So I know that it's needed.
Yeah, it definitely is. You know, we don't have a lot of good guidebooks on grief, and it's something that, you know, my wife and I have walked through with our story, obviously. And I'll be honest with you, once I started learning how to be vulnerable and open that story up to other people, I have run across so many people in this world who have some level of that sort of an experience in their own life, and most of them never had any help walking through it. And
right.
It's easy to do, to do it, and I don't want to say the wrong way, but the hardest possible way. And I mean, I full disclosure, I did it the wrong way, and I will call it the wrong way because I climbed down in a whiskey bottle and I swam laps for a while, and that is the wrong way. Trust me, It's I can tell you why I experienced that, but yeah, there's not a real good guidebook that I found on how to handle that kind of grief, and even if you've never lost a child, as a foster parent, if you have set so many of these kids back to places that maybe you didn't agree with the judge's decision to send them back home, we don't get the final say in that.
Right. Yeah. And there is true grief in that. And I think that that's one thing it's hard as you walk through that, because it may not be in the best situation, and there's nothing you can do about that. I have a chapter in the book called Letting Go, and it's not specifically about that, but even just letting go of those things that we can't control and going through that process, and how important that is, because otherwise we're going to be walking around weighted all the time, and we can't, then it renders us useless to be effective in our lives, in what we've been called to do.
Yeah. And when we don't learn those lessons, and then we model that stuff for all these kids who come into our home, we model that behavior for them, and then they get older and we're surprised that they're making all the mistakes that we made in life.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. It just perpetuates.
Yeah. It's a great way to learn how to step through some hard stuff. Well, Kim, I appreciate your time today. I really do. And your story and your openness, because I'll be real honest, I have not gotten in a whole lot of places and shared the real depths of our story with the child loss. We've shared a lot of the foster care stuff, but we haven't shared a lot of that stuff. It's been 7 years now. Yeah, we're coming up on the 7th anniversary, and I still don't know if I can really tell that story in the way it needs to be told, and maintain any kind of composure. And I'm still dealing with that kind of stuff. So I am just so thankful that you're at a place in your life where you're able to share that that experience and the lessons learned with others so that you can take a tragedy in this world and turn it into something beautiful, helping others.
Thank you so much.
Well, it's great talking to you, and I want to just remind everybody that if you want to find Kim's book, if you come to the website fostercarenation.com, up at the top there's a tab called Book Resources. If you're on mobile, it's I think a little thing on the side, but that's where all the tabs are, and in Book Resources it will be listed in there. If you're listening in the EU, full EU disclosure here, it's probably an Amazon affiliate link, so I probably get like 3 or maybe 7 cents if you click on that link. I don't care. Go find it straight on Amazon. It doesn't really matter. Just go find it. If this is something that you need in your life, go find it and get some wisdom from somebody who's walked a hard road. So thank you again, Kim, for your time. I really do appreciate it.
Thank you for having me. It's been a huge blessing.
Okay, Foster Care Nation, thank you for listening to Kim's story. Now take her knowledge and wisdom to heart so you can create love and healing in your family and community. Be sure to come back next week. We have new episodes every Tuesday. If you'd like to share your story as a guest, you can reach us at jason@fostercarenation.com. You can connect with other like-minded people on Facebook at facebook.com/groups/fostercareuj. And don't forget, we have a Patreon account where you can support our mission for as little as $5 a month. It's at patreon.com/fostercarenation. The links to everything are in the show notes in your podcast player or at fostercarenation.com. And as always,
You are so super awesome. I think you guys are cool. Yeah. Thank you for listening. Thanks.
Unparalleled Studios.